Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here, and thanks, Emily, for joining me up here on the stage. I am very curious to hear. You've only been in Toronto for a year. I'm very curious to hear a little bit about you, how you got here, what your impressions are of the Toronto business community. Well, look, I mean, Schneider is everywhere, so let's talk about Canada. Actually, give us a bit of your background.
Well, I'll start by saying I'm extremely pleased to be in Canada. I've enjoyed my first year here and I have many years ahead of me, so I can't wait to see what comes as far as the growth of the energy sector and how Schneider can be a part of changing the future. As for myself, as we said, I'm an American. I grew up in an industrial engineering background. My first love is manufacturing. I have always worked for electrical manufacturers for over 20 years. And to me, the heart of what we do every day is manufacture equipment. And then over time, we've seen the digital component and the combination of the internet, the OT and IT coming together to create, let's say, the new future of energy. And for myself, I've worked at Schneider for over 7 years. I absolutely am passionate about electricity and the future of energy.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about your company's footprint in Canada. I think we were just talking before, and I guess it struck me that Schneider is everywhere, but maybe not at the top of our consciousness in terms we don't necessarily realize that it's everywhere all around us. So tell us about your footprint here in Canada.
Sure. A lot of times some of our employees will complain that when they tell their friends and family that they work for Schneider Electric, they'll get told, so the sausage company? Because if you go to the grocery store, that's the Schneider you see. We're not as well known across the everyday consumer. We're a B2B business. You'll see us in 1 out of every 2 homes, 1 out of every 3 commercial or industrial buildings. Schneider is powering the buildings, the homes, and cities of Canada. If you're talking to a contractor, a builder, or a large industrial manufacturer, they will be aware of us. And as for our footprint in Canada, we have over 2,000 employees countrywide. We have 3 factories here locally in the country, in Montreal, in Edmonton, and in Victoria, as well as service centers, multiple R&D centers, and a pretty substantial presence for many, many years. And we are what we call the most local of global companies. Schneider likes to set up in a country and serve the local market from that market.
Okay, so let's make it real. Can you give us some examples of some of the projects that you're working on here in Canada, and I guess how it's changing the way that Canada uses its energy?
Absolutely. For a long time, energy was when we talked about energy, the conversation really focused simply on reliability and resiliency. Today, the conversation has expanded to sustainability. If you think about Canada specifically, 70% of our carbon emissions come from energy. And of the energy that we generate here in Canada, over 50% is wasted. So many people are starting to refer to energy efficiency as the unsung hero of sustainability. Where Schneider comes into this is, as an electrical equipment supplier, we are now combining electrical equipment and digital technology to not just power the homes, buildings, cities, et cetera, of Canada, but also improve the operational efficiencies and reduce carbon emissions. An example, for your question, would be at airports. So you can see Schneider at multiple airports across the country. We've worked specifically with the Vancouver airport to help upgrade and modernize their electrical infrastructure using our digital technologies, which we call, one of our platforms is called EcoStruxure Power. Our Asset Advisor helps to not just create electrical the consistency of electricity throughout their entire system, but also advanced automation, analytics, preventative measures to reduce their energy consumption, automate the systems. What would be an example of how you're going to do this in an airport? Do you need the air conditioning running full blast at 3 a.m. in the morning when you have no people coming through the airport? The sensors and the digital technology help to automate the HVAC system, the overall lighting and so forth, to be able to reduce their usage, improve their operational efficiencies, and not just improve our carbon emissions, but also reduce operating costs.
So, how in Canada, what's the growth opportunity here? Are you expanding, and what's your trajectory?
There's so much potential in Canada to modernize their grid, to modernize buildings and the infrastructure. One fact that many people don't know, despite the digital technology that's available for commercial buildings, for example, 85% of Canada's buildings use no digital technology for managing their electrical infrastructure. There is so much potential to combine digital technology and with small investments in upgrading the infrastructure, the electrical infrastructure of buildings across Canada. We could improve our overall energy consumption. And why this matters as a country, I think many people know there's going to be a projected 2 times the demand on the electrical grid by 2050 that we see today. The way that we need to expand as a country, our capacity doesn't have to be the same way that we expanded our electrical generation in the past. We've got both the expansion of capacity that the utilities can be doing traditionally. There's the rise of the prosumer, which we call the producer and consumer of energy. Both homes, industries, commercial buildings can and are currently installing renewable energy on site to supplement the grid capacity that they're already consuming, which also offsets the capacity demand on the utilities, as well as implementing measures to improve the efficiency and thus not requiring quite as much energy as we think we may need by 2050.
Okay, so I think let's look at an example of that. I think your company is working is it Arizona, where you have you're working with neighborhoods and communities to put them onto a solar grid. Can you?
This is
does that work?
An example that we've seen. This is an example of a utility in action. Arizona Public Service, and this is something that we would love to see across many utilities as an example. In order to supplement their grid capacity and their generation capacity, they've coordinated with the local government to put solar panels on government subsidized housing. They not only receive free real estate for a solar farm, they're also giving back to the community by then in turn offering reduced anywhere from reduced to free power bills for the residents of those homes. We, Schneider, want to continue to offer and work with Canadian utilities to encourage this type of behavior, obviously offer our services in providing equipment and design of these types of what we'll call anywhere from microgrids to utility grid scale renewable energy.
Is that possible given the infrastructure that we have right now?
There is investment needed. If you look at our aging electrical grid, our grid was designed in Canada in 1880. Of course, it's evolved over the years, but today, not only does it need to expand to meet the demand, it also needs to be updated to be able to integrate seamlessly with the renewables that are coming online. So if you think about, for instance, an airport that might want to put solar panels on the roof of its rental car facility in order to charge their EV fleet, they also are going to there's going to be excess energy generated by those solar panels that they could use in the airport, but also there's a concept of what we call bidirectional flow, in which that excess energy could flow back into the utility for use. This is an example of the modernization that needs to happen so that the utilities across the country are able to seamlessly integrate both the prosumers and from either a residential, industrial, commercial application.
Okay, so how does that play out? Because, it sounds amazing, right? It sounds like you've got a map in your head of how we transition. But a lot of that is dependent on having a massive grid. So obviously everybody in this room knows we have a problem with the scope of the grid. But what's your vision? I mean, how would we get from here to there?
We like to use this equation. We call it the equation of the future at Schneider. Electric plus digital equals sustainable. And the idea being we know that electrification is critical for the future of sustainability. Electrification being the process of providing electric power to a building, a home, or a process. Electricity is proven to be the most efficient source of energy. So we start there and saying the more that we can convert electricity as the primary use energy source in Canada, the better. And then second, digitization, which is everything from advanced automation, from software to data solutions that help businesses, homes, et cetera, use the energy that they consume in the most efficient way possible. As an example, here in Toronto, we have been working with a bank, one of the top 4 banks in the city, to help them upgrade and modernize their facility with the ambition of saying they want to be able to reduce their energy consumption by 30% by 2030. By modernizing and installing advanced automation through our EcoStruxure platform, we've already in year 1 reduced their consumption by 13%. If buildings are known to be 38% of the world's carbon emissions, just applying digital technology to these buildings to make what we'll call invisible energy waste visible, building managers, owners, operators can start to make decisions to start to reduce their emissions and reduce their energy consumption. So it's good for the planet is also good for alleviating the stress on the grid, lowering their operating costs all at the same time. I think the most important thing is that it's not one simple solution. It's not just all the weight is on the utilities, whether utilities, the government, business and the private sector, as well as concerned citizens. We all have a part to play in this when we think about that equation of electrification plus digitization.
Okay, but digitization, I immediately think about, all the talk we've heard recently about artificial intelligence and, scaling up to incorporate that into many, many different business decisions and the great demand that will put on the grid. I mean, it's astronomical. I don't even know how we will get from here to there unless we dramatically slow that whole process down. So, I mean, how do you work that into your equation?
Data is exploding. You're not wrong. I think we've all heard of the massive amounts of data that is currently being generated, but it's going to explode exponentially with AI. From a data management perspective, Schneider is very interested in saying, how do we harness useful data to be able to create energy efficiency for those data centers that are going to be exploding, so that they're not utilizing as much demand on the electrical grid as they may have in previous years. So I think it's sort of this combination of the data that's driving these data center market growth also needs to use the same digital tools in order to reduce their energy consumption and the strain that it would put on the future grid. Likewise, when we talk about renewables, there's also this opportunity for these same data centers to be becoming more of a prosumer, to install their own localized generation via solar panels on the roof to be able to alleviate some of the strain as well on the local utilities.
Okay, so obviously the solar is key to the expansion of the grid that you see. But how do you talk to me about how you see that grid playing out in Canada? I mean, you've been here a year now, and there's policy and politics involved, but there's also a lot of investment required. Mm-hmm. Where does that come from?
I think that there's a big opportunity for the federal government to play a part in a unified policy that incentivizes utilities and or prosumers to make those initial capital investments. When we look at the country as a whole, it doesn't take long to notice that every province and territory is on its own journey. And they're all coming from different starting points. When I think about why Canada has the advantage in this race to net zero, one of our biggest strengths is that 80% of our people have access to non-emitting generation. Provinces like BC, Quebec, Manitoba, Newfoundland, right? Generating hydroelectric power, which is one of our natural resources that already gives us an advantage. But not every province and territory has access to these same resources. For those areas of the country that need and have a longer journey and need to get started, I think that we have let's say, a desire to see the government help to create those sort of incentives to make the initial investments. We have the potential to incentivize, I think we're seeing the investments that businesses are making because they see the ROI. But when it comes to the utility, I think that hand-in-hand collaboration with the government would be extremely beneficial.
Okay, so the federal government has in place quite a few different carbon incentives, and also what we know is the carbon tax. How does that play into your calculations? As it seems to be, a question about whether or not it's even worked. But what's it done for you, or how does it influence how you behave in Canada?
Well, what we see, it's a fact that if we look at the carbon taxes and the impact it's had on Canada, the calculation is, I think that Canada would have emitted 19 megatons of carbon emissions had it not been for carbon taxes in 2022. Be that as it may, no matter the political environment, there's always this sort of mix of decision to make around carbon tax versus incentives. Our Schneider, let's say, personal opinion is that we think that incentives work very well to help with the upfront capital expenditure because of the need to go in and make some of these investments in our outdated grid and in some of the territories and provinces that are further behind.
Okay, so I mean, if you could wave your magic wand, what would that look like after the next election? What would that regime look like to encourage your expansion, but also the expansion of the grid writ large?
I think it would look like incentives to put renewables in place for businesses. It would look like, one of the things that we've seen, I'll give an example. In Vancouver, you're seeing this new bylaw that's requiring all commercial buildings to report their emissions. The end result of this has been, we've seen a dramatic expansion of digital investments in those buildings so that they can track their emissions and then start to make choices around how they start to reduce them. So I think there's many different ways that the government could expand a policy like that across the country around reporting emissions, around incentives around renewables for private businesses, and then also incentives for upgrading the very outdated infrastructure of the grid that just is simply not future ready to be able to seamlessly integrate those renewables.
All right. So how does, I mean, you've worked in the United States you're from the United States, but your company's global. I mean, so Canada's grid is outdated and we're dealing with outdated infrastructure. How does it compare to the rest of the world? Are we that far behind?
I wouldn't say that. I think we're all in the same race. There's where we're seeing some of the countries that are moving far ahead and making those investments are probably more in Europe and Northern Europe. We've seen pockets of investments in Sweden that could be great examples. As far as us versus the US, I wouldn't say that we're behind where the US is. In many ways, when I speak to my colleagues in the US, I'll say to them, think of Canada as one big California as far as the interest. There's so much diversity in the US, which we see in Canada as well, around public opinion on sustainability. Where I feel we have a leg up is our natural resources, our interests and investments and what we've seen as far as our commercial businesses and their commitments to their stakeholders to reach net zero. I mentioned the airports. Vancouver Airport's already said we want to be net zero by 2030. Forget political opinion, forget the 2050 goal. They're going to, as a business, they've committed to this. I think I'm seeing across Canada, and we all are companies that are committed to reaching those objectives in order to meet the stakeholder commitments, as well as long-term ROI on operational efficiencies. This country has the technology to get there, but we do have to act now.
So on the technology to get there. So, I think a lot of people in this space would say that, cutting emissions, it's completely possible. We can do it dramatically. We have all the technology out there. We just need the market conditions to actually go in there and make it work. Mm-hmm. But your company has won awards for innovation. I would not think for a moment that you're going to say, okay, we've got what we need now. Let's just go for it. So where are you pushing in terms of research and development and innovation? Where does the next thing come from that will actually make it even better and even more efficient?
I think when we look at some of the technology, it's not that there is a lot of emerging technology that we're watching around hydrogen. It's some of this small reactors. It's very interesting what's coming out, but what we currently have, I think it's really important to say, we don't need to wait on some future innovation to save us. If you look at our current innovation, I think that our biggest interest in seeing the digital grid. So, we have a grid, the grid needs to be digitized in order to be modernized and updated as well. So I think digitization of the grid, where there's a modernization of buildings and industries, and implementing what we call building management systems in order to modernize their electrical infrastructure.
Okay, and I would like to expand a little bit too on your thinking about consumers in all of this. So you talk about a prosumer. How does do we have that mentality here in Canada? Can we get it? And how does that fit into our rationalization of the energy going forward?
One of the things that we've seen in the U.S., Costco is building stores every day in the U.S. that are completely disconnected from the grid because they've said we can't get the power supply. We're going to build they're building stores that include solar panels and a backup generator. While this is not what we necessarily advocate, but the idea that technology is there actually opens the door to say, how can we be more creative in solar and wind, in backup generation, to be able to subsidize the grid, the capacity shortage that already exists, and then homeowners themselves, hand in hand with some additional incentives most likely, can also add local generation. With the advent of EV, with the fleets that are, with everybody looking at how can I get more, switch to electric vehicles, there's not enough power to supply every homeowner with an EV charger today. So the ability to have local generation to subsidize that would be where a homeowner, a consumer, a concerned citizen can start to make personal investments.
Yeah, I can't help but think that there would be, a whole bunch, a very wide swath of the public that would love to get a piece of that would just love to be able to participate and know how to do it themselves. Mm-hmm. Before we get there, though, where does gas and nuclear, where do they fit into the picture here? I mean, can we get to the point of everybody participating in a solar fueled or hydroelectric grid without going through gas and nuclear, and how do they fit in there as part of the system?
Well, nuclear is considered to be non-emitting, so it's also a great source of, you could look at France with EDF. That's a great source of non-emitting power generation. When it comes to gas, we're very much watching what's happening in the oil sands region today. I think there's a level of curiosity to see what technology is being applied today, because we're hearing of new technology that's helping to reduce the emissions of the generation that's happening in that region. I think there's a bit of a watch and see. I think the future, if we look at it today, it's electric, it's digital. I could be surprised in 5 years what what comes out of some of the pockets of this region. But with the technology that exists today, the path to net zero is electrification.
Okay, so just to sum up then, I think it's very interesting to hear you talk about, the state of Canada's grid and the state of our infrastructure right now. And I guess what you're saying is that they're in quite a bit of trouble because it's outdated and the demand is astronomical. Where if we look out into the future, but there is a path, and that the path is electrification at a very, very local level, electrification at a regional level that seems to be kind of a little bit uneven across the country, but with some government support and incentives built in there, we can build up that grid and kind of even things out and build a platform, an infrastructure across the country that would actually get us there. Is that fair?
That's fair. I think you captured. I mean, we all have a part to play, and I think that's the point. Whether you're a business owner, a utility, a government official, or even a homeowner, we all have a choice every day to decide, am I going to invest am I going to look at the electrification of the spaces in which I live and work? And how can I modernize that with digital technology? Between these two things, we can change the future of Canada. There's so many good things happening. This is not a place of hopelessness. This is a place of great hope. We actually have the ability to lead the world into a cleaner, more resilient, more sustainable future, but we do have to act now, and we do need to make those investments. We're a country full of various resources, various peoples, various cultures. And so I think recognizing that and understanding that while we are asking for federal incentives and a policy that leads us towards sustainability, there has to be an acknowledgement that each region is going to be distinctively different and their path may look a different way. But that being said, I'm very hopeful for this country, and I'm seeing the investment every day. We have customers and companies coming to us asking, help us to get to a greener future. I need to understand the technology that's available, and that's where we come in. We want to educate the country, the utilities, and the private sector as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.